Hi, everyone. I'm Eric. I'm a physicist,
And I'm Sam. I'm a philosopher.
and we're the Boltzmann brains. And today we're talking about philosophy. And in particular, this is something that came up previously. The question, is philosophy useful?
Yeah,
And I
this might
want,
get a little spicy, Eric. We'll
yeah,
see.
yeah, it's hard. I mean, right, Sam is a professional philosopher, so I feel like feelings could be hurt. But
That's okay.
we'll,
We're
we'll, we'll,
prepared to hurt them.
all right, yeah, so we'll try to keep things civil. Right, but Sam, let's start with a quick definition of philosophy before we start picking apart the question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is hard to describe or define. I mean, philosophy comes from the Greek, love of wisdom. But wisdom, what does wisdom mean? Uh, it's unclear. I think of it as studies of the fundamental aspects of reality, but I don't mean from a scientific perspective, not like the large scale structure of the universe or anything, but what is causation? Does God exist? Do humans have free will? What are objects? Um,
Wait, I'm sorry. So
Questions like that.
go back to the beginning again. It is the study of
The
what
fundamental nature of reality. But
the
by fundamental,
fundament.
I don't mean like physics or cosmology. I
Right.
mean,
So
yeah.
okay, so you're going to seed the things that scientists do. So that's not part of philosophy.
Some of it, right. I think, oh, I mean, one thing I've always thought is when you start getting answers, then it stops being philosophy. So, yeah. So natural philosophy used to include science. Philosophy used to include science. And then science started getting somewhere. And it's like, well, no, you can't be philosophy anymore. You're getting answers.
Oh, okay. So wait, I mean, this sort of raises the possibility that the question of philosophy is that philosophy, by definition, isn't useful because as soon as it becomes useful, it becomes something else.
Well, I think you're presuming that to be useful, you need to get answers.
Well, I
That
am a
might not be
scientist.
true.
I'm a scientist, right? So if
Yeah.
you're not getting answers, then yes, there's no possibility for utility there.
Okay. Well, that's exactly what we're going to disagree about then.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Uh, all right. So rolling into it, how did you want to do this? Did you want to talk about the different pieces of philosophy? Was there a specific piece of history you wanted to address? How did you want to start off?
Well, I could just come up with a couple examples where philosophy has been extremely useful,
Okay. Hit
and you
me.
can respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Go
I'm
for
going
it.
to say yes, that philosophy is incredibly useful, both on a personal level and also at a societal level. And so I'll give you two examples. One is in political philosophy. The Enlightenment period saw a lot of reflection on the nature of what political states were and freedom and rejecting monarchies. And the philosophy, for example, from Rousseau and other philosophers, Thomas Hobbes, led directly to the United States Constitution, which I regard as being a very influential and pragmatically useful document. I'm a big fan of the Constitution, and I think it came directly out of philosophy.
Okay. All right. So the Constitution is the Constitution the document that begins we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, or is that the Declaration of Independence?
I feel like that's a declaration of independence,
Oh,
but
okay, all right.
we didn't prepare for that. Yeah.
I mean, right. So I
We
mean,
the
I know that
people.
in the
I think we
Declaration of
the people is the Constitution.
in the Declaration of oh
Yeah. But I
yeah,
claim this for the Declaration of Independence too.
all men are right. So all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights,
That is a
life, liberty.
philosophical claim. Yes.
Yeah, and that actually, I'd agree with that. In fact, if you hadn't brought that up, that was one of the things I was going to bring up when it became my turn.
Yeah. Cool.
Uh,
Okay.
okay, so not very controversial if we're both agreeing that
No, no.
the founding
Yeah.
documents of the United States are at core the elaboration of philosophical principles.
Yes. You want another one?
Okay. Well, I think actually, I think I would like to unpack that a little bit more since you've brought it
Sure.
up. Yeah, I think you need to make your case. I mean, we can circle back, or
Yeah.
you can give us the examples to begin with, and we can circle back around to the history. But I would rather, since you've brought up the Declaration and the Constitution, can you just lay out a little bit of the intellectual thread written down by philosophers that became those documents.
I mean, to a degree, it's really not my area. Like, I'm not a
Oh,
political philosopher, social
well, no,
philosopher.
but Sam, you're
I
the
don't deal
philosopher
with it.
who's defending the utility of philosophy. You've,
Yeah, but yeah. So Rousseau would be a major thinker here. Any member of the Enlightenment, and you can go to earlier precursors as well. John Locke was incredibly influential, specifically in regards to the founding fathers. So.
wait,
Um,
can you tell us what Locke said or what Rousseau said in very brief?
Oh boy. I mean, the idea of a social contract is part of this. The idea that people that we're agreeing together to hold ourselves to a certain set of rules. Um,
You see, I feel like you didn't. Actually, that's interesting because you're picking at the things that I actually think have more historical precedence just in like the evolution of constitutional monarchy in England, for example, right? So I don't know that, right, which like the Magna Carta, I think I'm guessing it predates a lot of this Enlightenment thought that you're citing.
yeah. But here again, you're going to see my general strategy here. Philosophy is such a broad thing. Anyone thinking about the structure of a political state and what rights people have and how it should be constructed to be fair, that's philosophical thinking. So it just almost follows that any kind of discussion about the intentional way
Oh,
that a country is set up that's a philosophical claim. Goes
see,
back to
for me,
Plato in the Republic,
yeah,
talking
but for
about
me,
the
as a
ideal.
as a scientist, for me, philosophy only gets to claim an influence in this case if they were the first, right? In other words, if the Magna Carta was the first before Rousseau, then for whatever
Yeah,
particular assertion we're making, then Rousseau doesn't get to Rousseau being a philosopher is
yeah.
irrelevant.
No, but I'm saying that the articulation of the Magna Carta is itself a philosophical activity. I mean, there's not
Oh,
a
I
named
see.
philosopher associated with that, but I'm saying that's philosophy. You're thinking about what is fairness, what is justice, what is the right way to set up a state. Those are philosophical questions in political philosophy.
Well, I mean, at some point, those questions became questions in political science, or no?
Well, right. Once you start getting answers, then yeah, maybe it becomes political science. If you're doing more empirical studies, then right, some political scientists take that approach. But something that's like political theory is closer to political philosophy. Where's the boundary between political theory and philosophy? That could be a discussion. If someone's doing more empirical studies, then that looks more like social science, and maybe that would be political science.
Okay. So, for instance, actually, just in the preparation for today's podcast, I was thinking the particular claim it really is sort of a philosophical axiom. All men and women are created equal. Uh, and I believe we're supposed to read that at least as all men and women are created equal in the eyes of the law, right? I mean, one has to specify, I think, the domain of inquiry we're following
Yeah,
here.
I mean, we're not all the same height.
Yeah, right. A biologist would obviously disagree,
Yeah, well,
but
but I mean, if that's ambiguous, that's equivocation on what equal means. But in terms of equal rights, um,
yeah, that's right. So all men and women, all human beings are created equal in the eyes of the law. And that, so I mean, there's two things there. One is we're all created equal, and the other is in the eyes of the law. Um, but the idea that, I guess, I mean, does that go back to ancient Greece? I know that the first democracies were in ancient Greece. I also know that there were heavy restrictions on who exactly was allowed to vote. Of course, there were restrictions on
right.
who was allowed to vote in the late 1700s in America as well.
Yeah, yeah, we could argue there are de facto restrictions right now
Oh yeah.
still.
But we so I mean, do we know anything about the origins of Athenian democracy? Like, was there were there? All I know is that Plato was sort of opposed to it, wasn't he?
Right. Interestingly, yes,
I mean, Plato was almost more of arguing for a benevolent dictatorship
by philosophers.
by philosophers. Sure. So were there any pro-democracy, as far as we know? I know a lot has been lost, but as far as we know, were there any ancient philosophers who were pro-democracy?
Well, so again, you're asking me in areas that are not and
Oh,
not in my
okay,
area of specialty, so
okay.
I don't actually know. Google would be
I mean,
much better at
as
answering
far
that
as I know,
question.
there were not.
Yeah,
As far as I know,
right.
I mean, partly that might have been. I, I think, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah. Okay.
let's
Anyway, so maybe we should move on, or is there anything else you wanted
yeah.
to add here?
Well, just about Plato. I mean, just to defend Plato a little bit. I mean, I was making a little joke about the philosophers, but he wanted it to be ruled by the best. In his view, the best would not want to rule. They wouldn't want power. And so in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think there's a character who like ends up they see him somehow. Maybe we can put it on the
Oh, wait.
screen.
I know a lot about
Yeah.
Hitchhiker's Guide.
Isn't there a character who doesn't want to like be in charge but is in
Wait,
charge?
are you talking about the president of the galaxy, Zaphod Beeblebrox?
I don't know. I don't think it's that
I mean,
person.
I mean, there's a one of the, maybe not the main character, but there's a major character in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy named Zaphod Beeblebrox, who
The guy with
is,
two heads, right?
yeah, he has two
Yeah.
heads.
He's
Um,
not, no, not that guy.
Wait, you're saying then I don't know who you're referring
There's
to.
some, yeah, okay. Well, we'll have to look it up, but I believe there's something like the philosopher king, and it's supposed to be ruled by the best, not not rule. So it's not ruled by the person who's best suited to be a ruler, which on Plato's view would be someone who doesn't want to be a ruler.
Okay.
And so I think it's a different. It's not just some kind of dictatorship, dictatorship. It would be an aristocracy in the true sense of an aristocracy, which is ruled by the best. And so it was conflated later by people who thought, well, if you're in this family, that means you're the best. But the original meaning is people who would be the best qualified to be a ruler.
All right. So bring this back around to the usefulness of philosophy. Um, the idea is that when you begin to pick apart the laws governing a given society, when you begin to try to connect those with questions like, are all people created equal? Are all people being treated equally? Should so that is philosophy. As you said, when you begin to derive answers, it begins to drift away from philosophy towards, let's call it, applied applications, political
Yeah, yeah.
applications.
If it starts to become empirical study, although there are people nowadays who are called empirical philosophers who do experiments
Oh boy.
a lot of times on like intuitions about the trolley problem, etc. Um,
Well, wait, do you
so,
want to go down that rabbit hole, or do you want to move on to the next field in which you think philosophy is useful?
oh, well, sure. I mean, if I could add a few about like the whole UN Charter of Human Rights, that's a philosophical document. And if we are, I mean, just the phenomenon that I'm describing, where you're like whole fields like psychology in the 19th century split out of philosophy.
Mm.
And so philosophy has birthed all the other disciplines, which I think is useful. So that's
Wait.
another
So
way.
how did, I mean, actually, I will, I mean, I'll mention here that science, until the word science really didn't become popular to describe the kind of stuff I do until the early 1800s. Before then, what scientists do was always called natural philosophy,
Right.
right? Which was, so it was regarded as a branch of philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think that's rightly so.
Right.
And we
Immanuel
could go,
Kant has a little paper called On Volcanoes on the Moon.
oh,
So he did not really distinguish between these as his activity. He just
but let's see. So, but you mentioned psychology. I don't know how. So wait, what were the origins of psychology and philosophy? This part of the story I don't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot. If you look at a lot of people, I mean, like John Locke, David Hume, a lot of those empiricists, they're studying the mind and how it works.
Okay.
and do the things that a brave person would do. And then you, over time, you develop the virtue by through action. And I think that that's a psychological theory about becoming more virtuous or changing your habits. And so that's just Aristotle.
Well, I
Um,
think one could also, I mean, Socrates went about it in a strange and really irritating way, but I think one of the ways to think about Socrates is that his main takeaway is no matter who you are, you should have humility in the face of your own ignorance. Would you
right.
say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, right. The wise
Right? But
person is someone who knows
humility
they know
is,
nothing.
I mean, humility is a way to conduct yourself, but I think if you are humble in the face of other people, humble in the face of the world around you, I mean, I mean, that is a there's a psychological aspect to that.
Right.
It's not just
And
about how you perform to others, it's how you feel about yourself.
yeah, John Locke had this idea of a tabula rasa, which I think has been disproved by psychologists, but that's a psychological theory that at birth we're a blank slate. Now
Yeah,
it turns
yeah,
out it's not
I agree
true,
with you.
but
It's that to me that seems like obvious nonsense, but I have the benefit
yeah,
of lots of
yeah,
what centuries of additional experimental
yeah.
work.
But it's a cycle. It's a theory in developmental psychology, even if false. He was trying to do psychology. So
I see. So it's a yeah, okay, I'll buy that. So psychology has its origins in questions that people who we recognize as philosophers uh, actually, did they self-identify as philosophers typically? I mean, the people you're citing, did they use philosophy to describe what they were doing? The word philosophy.
John Locke.
Yeah. Like, would he have said, "I am a
Yes.
philosopher," or "This is a book of philosophy"?
Well, I'm not actually sure what his self-description would be.
You know, because
So
if his
obviously,
self-description was a psychologist, then
well,
I mean,
no, I mean,
I
the
mean, because
field didn't exist.
the ancient Greeks that we're talking about, they did describe themselves as philosophers, right? I mean,
Right.
right?
I think
They
John Locke would have called himself a philosopher.
okay, all right,
Yeah. David
okay.
Hume would be another person on this. And William James from the 19th century was philosopher and psychologist and
Oh,
was
I
right
know that
around the
name.
time when it
He
was
actually doesn't
developing.
get as much. He's not very well known among non-psychologists today. But when I look into the history of science, his name comes up a lot. Uh, for instance, he discussed the subconscious or the unconscious mind decades before Freud did. But Freud gets all the credit because his ideas were so incendiary.
Yeah. Right. So that would be another example. And if I'm allowed to throw one other out there, part of philosophy is logic. And so if we look at Gödel and then Turing, the whole field of computer science and the whole revolution of computing, AI, all of that came from philosophical philosophical inquiry into logic and formal logical systems.
Yeah, I think for the sake of our listeners, we should unpack a little bit about what formal logic is. I mean, you and I know what formal logic is. I mean, actually, I can maybe I could show one of my own experiences with formal logic, which
Sure.
is when I was an undergraduate, I had two philosophy courses. One was an intro to philosophy, I think. The other one was it was a half semester course, and it was on logic. And there was no teacher. There was no grad. There was it was right. This was the mid to late 1980s, and the entire course and my entire grade was based on I would log into a computer and I had to get good at manipulating symbols on a screen, symbols that meant like if statement A is true and if statement B is true, then statement A and statement B are both true or some such or
Right.
some such thing like that. But there was just this set of symbols on the computer screen that I could manipulate. For me, it just started to feel a lot like a video game, but a video game that had very restrictive rules. Um, and so that was my exposure to formal logic. And Carnegie Mellon was and is a very good computer science school. So this was a very early experiment in using an expert system to educate students.
That's a cool story.
But yeah, yeah. But yeah, so formal logic is statements like, if A is true, then B is true, and how do you manipulate those statements? to draw more sophisticated conclusions. But I'll also mention that I'll agree with you that the way a computer chip is organized is you could think of most of our listeners, I think, will know that a computer chip has a bunch of memory, which is just a bunch of zeros and ones, which can be thought of as yes and no or true and false. And so you could phrase pretty much any computation as if if the particular bit of memory at this particular address is a one or is a true, uh, then look at the next bit at this particular memory address, and if it is also true, then do some subsequent action, which is typically changing another memory element at a third address from either true to false or false to true. I mean, literally everything that we do on our computer at its core is built up over these very simple operations done just repetitively, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of times a second.
Right. Right.
But yeah, one can certainly argue that these are just, I mean, they're orders of magnitude faster, and the if-then statements are orders of magnitude more complicated than these early founders of logic would have ever imagined, I think. But at its core, it's still based on what you and I would both call a formal logic.
Right. Absolutely. And logic goes back to Aristotle and earlier, but Aristotle would probably be the first person who really tried to systematize what kinds of arguments were valid and invalid.
Okay.
So it's a very long history of logic. And I would say that formal logic really is in the intersection of linguistics, computer science, mathematics, and philosophy. So I'm not saying philosophers have the only claim on logic, but we're part of it for sure. And the earliest
Oh,
logicians were philosophers.
in linguistics, which is the study of how languages function almost as a logical system, right? Like how do you construct a sentence? There are rules on where you can put the verb, where you can put the noun, and in different languages, those rules are different. That actually feels a lot like what I was describing as formal logic. I don't, although you mentioned linguistics, I don't think of linguistics as a branch of formal logic, but maybe it is. Or what is the
Yeah,
connection there?
it's a kind there. I mean, I think they have like finite state automata. I mean, linguistics really focuses on strings and the generation of strings, and you
A
can
string
say
a
what string.
string in our case being a sentence that we say out loud
Yeah,
or
yeah,
write down.
a sequence of characters. And so what kinds of sequences of characters are allowed or not allowed in any particular language. And so then you can do that for specifically formal languages. And so linguistics would really contribute to defining legitimate and illegitimate strings of formal languages.
Oh, I see. So, but just to unpack that for our listeners, another way of saying that is different languages have different rules about where to put the subject of a sentence or the verb in a sentence. If you've ever paid any attention to the way Yoda talks, right? I mean, I'm very, very used to it now, right? But when you first hear the way Yoda talks, his sentences are generally organized in a very strange way. Okay, but that would just correspond to a different formal structure for sentence construction, and that's something that a linguist could study.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
those are my initial arguments. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you
Yeah. I
should
would say.
take the floor.
Yeah. I would say that. Right. So we're discussing whether philosophy is useful, and what have we got so far? We've got that philosophy has been useful in the past because it has been the launch pad, arguably, for the scientific method, for logic, which became computer science, for political philosophy, which became political science, and all the many of the different kinds of governments that we have around the world. But in particular, the founding documents of the United States are arguably philosophical documents, either in whole or in part. I think I'm inclined to agree with all of that. I think philosophy definitely gets credit for these contributions. I think so. Why do people think that philosophy might be useless today rather than in the past, right? So And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how even so, I was going to compare it with theoretical physics. Okay, there are some so right so there are some branches of theoretical physics. Well, there are some branches of theoretical physics that work hand in hand with experimental physics, and those have spun off things, for example, like the laser, the transistor, which is the foundation of computers. I don't think anyone's going to argue that experimental physics is not useful in a whole variety of ways. Um, the but there are branches of theoretical physics which, as of today, have never been useful, right? So I think string theory is an obvious example. Um, Actually, the study of the universe as a whole, called cosmology, it's hard to see how that ever could be useful because because there's no way for us to move a galaxy around or cause another Big Bang or change the fate of the in other words, it's a purely intellectual pursuit. So there are branches of theoretical physics that do seem useless at present. And I was going to respond to the criticism of philosophy the same way I would respond to the criticism of a branch of theoretical physics which so far has not been useful or so far has not spawned a branch of engineering. And that's by saying that the reason theoretical physics is uh, is useful or not useful, is important, is because we don't know what tomorrow holds, right? We don't know which little sliver, which little corner of seemingly irrelevant theoretical physics today is going to turn into the next technological revolution tomorrow. Right. And I think philosophy is probably, I would argue that philosophy is probably the same, that there might be alleyways in philosophy today which seem to be unanswered, to have no answer, or which seem to be a dog chasing its own tail. But it's very hard to know today what 10 years or 100 years from now, which of those alleyways might become the next political philosophy or the next computer science. Sam, would you say that's a fair guess?
Right. I think that's a great analogy. Boy, we're agreeing too much here.
Yeah, we are
But
agreeing too much.
yeah, I'm a big believer in basic fundamental research for that exactly, both for that reason that you're talking about, that that you don't know. Who would have guessed if you go back to 1800 and start looking at what logicians were doing, they would never in a million years would have guessed about the impact of computing technology on the world today.
Yeah.
It'd be inconceivable to them, but the work they were doing were essential for it. So I agree with that. But here's where I'd like to challenge your idea of usefulness, because
Okay.
I think that uh, there's useful to society or useful to create a product or to do something, but there's also usefulness to a human living a life. And so I would argue that actually cosmology, if we made advance there and we knew what the large scale structure of the universe is, or what's the eventual future fate of the universe, trillions of years in the future, is what's going to happen, which is an open question as far as I understand it.
Oh,
I
it
think
is
it
an open, it's
matters.
definitely an open question. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it matters to us, not that we're going to do anything with it. Like we're not going to build a machine based on what the universe is going to do in however many trillion years, but just to understand as humans what the universe is like and how we fit in it and how that relates to how we live our life, right? Since we live finite lives, if the universe has a finite life, I think it has all kinds of implications for our own being. And so I think there's a whole other category of usefulness, even if you never make a product or make an advance or make a discovery based on something that we can find, to quote Boethius, the consolation of philosophy, that we can understand
Oh,
ourselves
let's repeat that. The consolation.
of
First, I thought you said
philosophy.
constellation.
Oh no, consolation.
The
It's a book
consolation
by
of philosophy.
Boethius. I'm not quite sure how to say that, but
Yeah.
uh, just the idea that understanding how we fit in with the universe and the world and how things work, what's true, whether God exists or not, is that practical? Or that's deeply
Well,
personal to someone.
some people would argue it's practical. I don't want to alienate any religious listeners.
Yeah. No, yeah, but I mean, I guess yeah, I guess that's an open question about like does God commit miracles or whatever, but perform, all right? Not commit miracles. Um, but regardless of its utility, I think that it's important for us to know these things. And so on that ground, I would say even the hidden corners of philosophy and physics are useful to us as humans.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I am going to agree with you that, I mean, my entry point for physics as a teenager was I was deeply interested in cosmology, the Big Bang, large-scale astronomy like galaxies and black holes, things that have, to this day, no technical applications of any kind. And it's hard to see how they would have a technological application even in the future. But they were absolutely fascinating to me, and so they were valuable for me. They were valuable to me for my own sense of identity. And I do wonder. I mean, right? You became a philosopher. I became a physicist. So I don't know that I don't think we're representative. I don't think we are a representative sample of the population. Like
True.
I think if we like I think if like I could like I'm going to mention my parents, for example. I don't know that they I don't know that day to day they draw any. I mean, I could talk to them about this. Maybe we could do another episode where we talk to our parents.
Well,
but but I don't think my parents draw any solace from philosophy. I mean, there's nothing that they would identify. But I would have to work very hard. I would have to work very hard to figure out if I thought they drew any solace from philosophy. I mean, do you think the average person draws solace from philosophy or really abstract cosmology?
yeah.
Um,
I
yeah.
mean, and here's where the beauty of my defense, Eric, and you might complain about this, but that I think philosophy is such a broad thing. It encompasses so many things. So they might not get solace from reading David Hume or thinking about theories that professional philosophers have come up with. But if anyone is religious or thinks about religion or just thinks about like what is the meaning of life? That is a philosophical question. I think a lot of people think about that, even if they're not engaging with the history of philosophy about that, they're still doing philosophy.
Hmm.
So it's so broad, it's hard to avoid.
I still think I'm just going to say I still think this is a minority of the population. I mean, by the way,
Yeah,
that doesn't make it wrong. I mean, obviously, I mean, to me, these questions are in many ways, what make life worth living. I mean, to me, without these questions, life would feel really
yeah.
empty. But
Okay.
again, I'm aware that that puts me in a real minority.
Okay. So let me make my case. That even think of the most shallow people, and I don't want to stereotype or whatever,
Oh boy,
but
please don't give
I
a
won't.
specific example.
No, but think about people who I'm just thinking reality TV, people on reality TV who are having some whatever, Real Housewives or I don't know, the
All
house,
right,
the Big Brother.
Sam is throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah. No,
Sam has a beef
I'm
with the
saying
Real
they're interested
Housewives.
in philosophical questions.
Okay.
They don't appear to be like thinking about, the large scale structure of the universe or the meaning of life or whatever, but they're highly engaged with philosophical questions because they have a lot of debates about ethics. Should she have done that? Did you see what he did? Da, 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 da. That's not right.
Sam,
Those are ethical debates. That's philosophy.
I think you've just stumbled on a book idea, The Philosophy of the Real Housewives. This is a
I mean, there
guaranteed
are these, the philosophy of Star
guaranteed to sell
Trek,
a
the
million
philosophy,
copies.
whatever, it should be the philosophy. Like who
But
should who has a right to gossip in what situation? That's an ethical question.
I don't know.
We're so
I'm
big,
okay.
you can't avoid us.
I mean,
I don't.
you and I have agreed a lot during this discussion, but I think I might disagree with you on this particular in this particular case. I
Yeah.
don't think the Real Housewives are doing philosophy, but maybe we
No,
can get a Real
I think they're
Housewife onto
having. I think they're doing practical applied ethics, not
practical
in any systematic way, but they're at
applied
least
ethics.
engaging in ethical debates.
So when a
Yeah.
person on a reality program says, "I'm not here to make friends," that is a philosophical axiom about how they should conduct themselves.
Well, I mean, not. I don't know about that particular statement, but he shouldn't have done that is an ethical claim. That was morally wrong of him. That's an applied ethical claim.
I don't know. I think we're getting into gray territory here. Um, all right. So, I believe, unfortunately, I believe our recording time is just about up.